Hi, and welcome to week 6. This week we're getting into animatics, which is kind of one of my favorite parts of the storyboarding process. This is our last lecture that I will pre-record. Next week we are going back to our Monday live lectures. So we've got 2 discussion boards. Your first one is about production designers. Production designers are responsible for determining the overall look of a project and making an entire team understand the look for production. The role is integral to success of a film. Research a production designer for a favorite film, explain why you chose them, the films they've done, elements throughout their work, and how you can use them as an influence. So I think it's really interesting that, a lot of art degrees are out there. You could get a degree in graphic design. You could get a degree in game design. You can get a degree in visual effects. But what's available job-wise is there are many, many more options. Production designers are an example of something that you can do, and they're kind of the top role that oversees all these little pieces to make sure that they all fit together. Are you following the same color scheme? Are you following the correct style? Is the mood coming through the whole way? So I think it's really interesting to look up production designers, look up what they do, see if that's something that might be interesting to you. And as always, make sure you're looking up job roles, seeing what's out there, what's available, what you might be interested in. You might find that there's a specific role that you didn't even know to search. A lot of times when people are getting ready for entering the job world, their search is very limited. Let's say I wanted to be a production designer, so production designer, and that's all you can look, production designer jobs. But really, there are so many other keywords that you can look up. So I would get used to kind of doing some research and seeing what jobs are available, looking in those job roles and seeing what they need in terms of a background, in terms of portfolio, etc. All right, little tangent, sorry. All right, discussing question 2. Post an in progress of your animatic for review and critique here. Comment on at least 2 of your classmates' projects. Make sure to comment on concept, composition, and presentation. So the deal here, though, is you cannot post your After Effects file. You have to do a render. After Effects references images, so if you take your After Effects file and open it on another computer, it will not open. It'll show the different frames that you have, but you will not be able to see the actual images that are in there. So just make sure to render your idea, then we can actually see it here. So what are we rendering? What are we looking at? It's using the Toy Story script to create the storyboard, which you did by Sunday, and now we're using it to make an animatic. Okay, so you will submit your completed storyboard in animatic form here, due Sunday. And then just a little looking to the future, we're going to look at original characters. Okay, you're going to write your own story, create your own characters, and eventually create your own animatics. All right, so animatics. We are going to be using After Effects. Again, if you have any problem with this, please reach out as soon as possible. But we're going to go over the basics of After Effects today. This is kind of practicing creating an animatic as we go throughout the term. We're going to learn a little bit more of the theory behind it and what makes one more successful. But for this one, we're just trying to get the main tools using the knowledge that you already have about transitions and timing, camera angles, all of that. So I have Photoshop here, and I just have 2 of your classmates' projects. And what we need to do before we do anything is crop out single frames. Okay, so this is your chance if you wanted to add any color, if you wanted to do anything. I'm not necessarily looking for color for this week. I'm just saying before you crop them down is when you can make the final design decisions. And you don't have to use Photoshop. You can use whatever you want, but you're just going to want to crop your specific shot. So I'm just going to do this middle one. You're going to notice, though, that resolution is going to really matter. So if you drew on paper and you had to take a photo and scan it in or whatever, it may be a very low resolution. So we may need to digitize it before we can use it. So then I'll just export this. JPEG is fine. All that's fine for right now. You may want to turn up the quality all the way. I'll just call this frame 1 and put it on my desktop. Then let's see, I'll crop out this one. I'm just going to get like 4 of these to show you. Let's turn this up. Oh, frame 2. All right, and then we'll do so see how this one's much smaller? We'll see how well this works. And last one, frame 4. Cool. Now again, however you want to create the frames to be separate, that's completely up to you. I tend to use Photoshop. You can use Illustrator, you can use Procreate, whatever you want. But you do want all of your frames to be separate files. So then I'm going to open up After Effects. And I'll go to New Project and New Composition. A composition in After Effects is just like a document in Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever. So we could call this, animatic, whatever you want to call it. I would try to work in 1920 by 1080. For your final, we will want to work in 1920 by 1080. For this one, if you find that you're having resolution issues, you can do 1280 by 720. Okay, but hopefully 1920 by 1080, that's our standard HD aspect ratio. Frame rate, 24 is perfect. And then the duration. We might not know how long our animatic is going to be yet. This is hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. So a lot of people go in and they're like, oh, 5:05, that's 5 minutes, 5 seconds. That's actually 5 seconds and 5 milliseconds. So I'm going to do 3 minutes. That's way more than I will need for this. Maybe we can just do 1 minute. Then I'll hit OK. So now this is just our base kind of setup. This is our document to work in. Okay? So now I need to bring in those frames that I created. So I'm going to go to File, Import File. You got to find all your frames here. I'll just hold Shift to select all of them. If you have them named differently, you can hold Command to select the different ones. But then I'm going to go to Open. If I click on it, you can see up here a preview of what it is. So if you weren't sure which one was which, hopefully you should name them in order so that you know this one comes first, then this one, then that one, but just in case. And then we need to bring them down actually into our composition. So all you're going to do is click and drag. Okay? You can do this for all of them at once or one at a time, whatever you would like. By default, when you bring anything into the composition in After Effects that's a still image, it makes it as long as the entire piece. So for here, I've got a minute-long hold of each of these frames, and their layer order matters, so we're only seeing frame 1 on top. At any point, if you want to preview, you can hit spacebar. Nothing's going to happen because it's just my whole image throughout the whole thing here. But so let's say I'm not entirely sure, but for now I want to make each of my frames 5 seconds. I'm using this time slider just to mark where 5 seconds is. You don't necessarily have to do that. But if you go to the end of any of these layers, you'll see my mouse becomes a double arrow, and I can click and drag to bring that in. Again, I can do this with multiple images at a time. Now, it's not necessarily a wise decision to hold frames for the same amount of time. A storyboard in animatic is not made so that each frame is held for 5 seconds. It's made to fit the timing of the dialogue or whatever action is occurring. So you're going to want to think about the actual timing here. So, and again, you might not know until you're actually making it, but I'm just going to give some variety to these for the sake of what we're doing. This top bar here, if you grab the blue, it allows you to zoom in or zoom out. This is very beneficial because if I want to line up my layers, I can do it that way. You can also grab the top layer, hold shift, grab the bottom, right mouse click, keyframe assistant, and sequence layers, and that will put them all in order. Now this doesn't deal with overlap if you have like a cross dissolve or anything like that, but it does help to kind of get them in order. So then you could kind of play around with your timing. Again, I hit spacebar to preview. I see that we have this going, then that one, then that, so forth. Now, before we get too far, I'm going to want to try to scale these up. The goal is that you're filling the frame, and in After Effects, you need to click and drag from a corner, then hold shift and pull. You cannot hold shift first, it will not work. So grab a corner, click and drag, then hold shift to keep the proportions. Last time, grab a corner. You'll notice that it doesn't keep the proportions, but then I hold shift and then it does. Cool. Make sure you save as you go along. You can even increment your saves. So animatic. Okay. So now we can start thinking about some of those details that we talked about before, like a zoom, a pan, a transition. So all of these images are going to have the same layers underneath them. So if we look, there's this little sideways arrow. If I click that, it says transform, and I'll click the arrow again. Again, each layer has this twirl underneath. So we have the anchor point, which is this center piece right here. I would say for the sake of this animatic, you won't really need to edit your anchor points. To show you what this means though, so my selection tool V on your keyboard and what's by default is what allows me to move this image around. It allowed me to scale it. In After Effects though, rotate, you have to use the rotation tool, which is hotkey W. If I go one tool over, it's the pan behind tool, hotkey Y, and what this allows us to do is move our pivot point. Same thing as if we did it here, but of course, you know, all Adobe products allow you to do the same thing in multiple different ways. So what's the difference here? If I grab my rotate tool and I grab a corner, you can see this is rotating from the center. Let's say this were a blade of grass though, I would want the grass to be planted in the ground and then rotate. So I can move this anchor point down, and now if I rotate, I'm actually rotating from that bottom point. If you do plan on moving your anchor point, do it before you start animating and before you get too many keys going in here. Again, if this is confusing, if you don't know what I'm talking about or anything like that, don't worry about anchor points for right now. Let's take a look at position here. Okay, so you can always click and drag on the numbers. This first one is in X, the second one is in Y, so horizontal or vertical. Scale, just like what it sounds, scale in, scale out, and these are linked to key proportion. So see this little link here. If you wanted to only distort, you could do that. I very rarely do that. I always keep the lock on. Rotation, this degree is, again, how many degrees? This blank x or 0x is how many times around do you want to go. It's not looking like anything is happening because it's a full rotation around. And then opacity is what we would use for our fade in, fade outs. So let's say this piece in particular, I want to fade in because it's the beginning of my story, right? So we need to actually set keys so that this is moving. You know, everything that I was just looking at is set up, but it's not actually moving because I haven't done keyframes yet. So the stopwatch here next to any of these words allows that property to become animatable. So if I click that stopwatch on, you'll see now it's a different color. You'll see that I have a keyframe right where my time slider was, and it's set. So what this means is, oh, I just undid it, I'm sorry. At 0 seconds, the opacity is 100% and it's keyed. Well, I actually want it to be 0%. So I just, clicked and dragged to get that to 0. And then I want it to take 2 seconds, so I'll move my time slider to 2 for it to get to 100%. And then you can toggle between. I'll hit spacebar. Okay? It takes 2 keyframes to make an animation. So going from 0 to 100, 2 keys, now it's going to move. So we've got a nice fade in. And then let's say I know I'm going to just cut to the next frame. Cut. Great. Maybe now I want to add a zoom. So I can always twirl this up to get it out of the way. It's still there. You can always twirl back. But I want to zoom. So for a zoom, you're going to need to move the position and the scale. So you want to move your time slider first. The order for animation is always time slider, move your object, the key is set. Time slider, object, the key is set. I'll show you a couple different ways so it makes sense. So I need to turn on the stopwatches for position and scale. So I had my time slider, I turned them on, it set keys because this is how I want it to start. And then throughout this whole frame, I want this to zoom in. So again, we can click and drag. Maybe I want it to move a little bit over. Okay? And it set the keys for me. So now I've got my zoom in. Okay? Now, pretty much everything that we've talked about, the zoom, the pan, the swipe, the crossfade, all of that is done within these 4 keys. I mean, rotation really isn't going to be used very much unless you have a specific reason for it. So position, scale, and opacity are really going to be the main things that you're going to animate with. Okay? So again, move our time slider to where we want to set keys, move our object, and it will automatically set the key for you. Make sure you move your time slider first. Let's say I don't actually like these keys. I messed up. You can click and drag over them and hit delete. If you wanted to copy keys, you can click and drag, Command C, move your time slider to where you want to paste them, Command V. And then I can always go in between, and let's do that, zoom in. So now it's going to be kind of fast, but ooh. Okay, you can also move them. So let's say, I'm going to delete these. Let's say I'm here, I've got my zoom, and I'm playing this back, and I want the zoom to happen faster. I want the zoom to happen and then hold. I can click and drag over the keys and move them in. The closer keys are together, the faster the animation will be. The further apart they are, the slower your animation will be. And that's just because you're allowing more or less time between those 2 keys. Okay, I know I'm spitting a lot of information out at you fast, but my hope is that you can kind of rewatch this video and see what you think. But if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate. I'd be happy to look at anything or go over anything again. So we've got our zoom in. Action is happening. Oh my gosh, I keep saying zoom in. Fade in, and then our zoom in. All right, so let's say I want a crossfade here. So I've got the zoom, and then I want a crossfade from this top frame to the second one. Then you may want to extend your frame a little bit because we need however many seconds you want the crossfade to be overlap. So let's say I'm at 7 seconds. Let's say a 2-second crossfade. Close enough. So what I can do is here, I know I want the opacity to be 100. And then for my frame 3, let me twirl all that down, I want the opacity to actually be at 0. So I turn the stopwatch on, moved it to 0. Then I'll move my time slider over here. And then I'll drop that to 0. And then on this one, I will bring it up to 100. And then you can actually see the crossfade. Sorry, my dog is making noises. I don't know if you can hear it, but that's why I had to pause. Okay, so now we get that nice crossfade because our top layer is going from 100 to 0, and our bottom layer is going from 0 to 100. Okay, so position, scale, and opacity are going to kind of be the main things here. Then let's say I do a cut, and then maybe, what do I want to do? If I want to do a swipe, that's going to be position. So I'm actually going to start with this one. Oops. I'll hit V for my selection tool up here. I'm going to move this, and if I hold shift, it'll keep it in line. But I'm going to start with that one off screen. And again, you're going to want to overlap these two layers. So let's say I want my swipe, it's going to start at like 10. Let's just do a fast one to here. So I'm going to bring that top layer over. And I need to look at position for both of these, layer 3 and layer 4. So I'm going to move my time slider back to the start. I'm going to key position, and I'm frame 4 as well. I'm going to key position. And then I'm going to move my time slider. And by the end of it, I want both of these, so I'll hold shift to grab both. And then I'll just click and drag, and I'll hold shift to keep them in line. You can see it set the keys for me. And then I have my quick swipe. Okay, so position, scale, and opacity are going to be the main things, and you're working with just 2 keys. Okay, if you wanted to make like a walk or something like that, you could move things up and down, but that isn't really necessary for this storyboard or animatic. Again, we're just trying to get the main tools down. Eventually, for your final animatic, you might split this main character from the background so that you can animate them separately and give more movement. All right, lastly, I want to talk about how you can kind of do your own voiceover. I know it can be a little strange to hear your own voice, but it's going to be really helpful to help with timing. So let me pull up your assignments here. The script from Toy Story. So what I do is I like to just record a video on my phone. Doesn't matter what the video is looking at, but let's say Let's say I'm trying to do this section, okay? So I'm just going to, oops, I just took a picture. I'm just going to go to video on my phone, and then I'll just record it. And again, if you want to have fun with this, go to town, have a great, show me what you got. If you're uncomfortable, you can just say the dialogue. You could also do sound effects this way as well. But so I'll just go to video on my phone. My video is just pointing at my computer. I'll put it on, and then I'll say the line. So, stop it, you mean old potato. Quiet, Bo Peep, or your sheep get run over. And again, depending upon how you say it, is going to change the time. But then all you have to do is email the video to yourself. I have iPhone and Mac computer, so I'm just going to AirDrop it. So you can see, stop it, you mean old potato. Quiet, Bo Peep, or your sheep get run over. Okay, really simple. Then in After Effects, I'm just going to go to File, Import File, and Downloads. Let's rename it. That would be helpful. All right, and then open. Now, preferably you would bring in your dialogue first so that you can kind of make your frames to match it. If during this animatic assignment you're just getting the frames in and that's a big deal for you, don't worry about sound. I want to make sure that you're getting the principles of the movement and how to do that, but if that seems okay for you and you want to bring in sound, then go for it. So then I'll just drag down my sound. Now, I don't want the video showing, so this little eyeball, I can just turn it off. Now it is just a sound file, and you can now match things up to it. So if we twirl down here where we were animating the properties before, we can twirl down and see the waveform. This is helpful to know, like, okay, well, this is my first chunk of dialogue, and this is my second chunk of dialogue. If you want, you can cut this in half. So let's say I know right here I want to cut it. I can go to Edit, Split Layer, and now these are two separate files so you can move them around independently. So maybe here and here. Stop it, you mean old potato. Quiet, Bo Peep, or your sheep get run over. Okay? So I want you to have fun with this and explore different ways, different keyframes that you can make and all of that. Then lastly, when you're done, we have to render it. So I'm going to go to the end of my last frame right here, and then I will look over here. I can see it's 13 seconds and 23 milliseconds. I'll go to Composition Settings, and I'll do that exact number here. So 13, 23. That just makes it so there isn't any leftover space after my video. Then you're going to go to Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. Adobe Media Encoder gives us more options to how we want to render our video. It does take a second to open. I have a tendency to not be patient and click it like 200 times. That's not necessary. Just click it once and wait a second. I can pause the video, but I don't think it'll take quite that long. You can hear my computer fan starting to go a little bit faster and louder, but what we're ultimately going to do is we're going to save it as an H.264, which is an MP4 file. MP4s can be opened in a variety of players on Mac, on PC, and it's going to be a nice quality video as well. So this is Open Media Encoder, but it's not done yet because my file is going to pop up in the queue here. So you just have to wait for it to pop up in the queue as well. And I promise it will pop up. You just have to give it a second. Come on. This will also allow you to change the location of where you're saving the file. You can give it a new name, but luckily, there we go. Luckily, all of our setup in After Effects using, our composition settings will set us up here. So you can see this is my After Effects file called Animatic. I want to change this to H264 if it's not that way already. We're going to match source because everything we set up in After Effects is good to go. And then you can click on the actual words here. Sorry about that. And then we can save it whatever we want. And we're going to just put it, I put it on the desktop. You can always move it afterwards. Save. And then you're just going to hit this play button. You'll see down here, it's going to start to kind of go through. You can see the preview at the bottom. And then you'll just wait for that to finish rendering. So that's taking your After Effects file, frame by frame, with the sound, with the visuals, and turning it into a video file that can be opened up anywhere. Like I mentioned earlier, you cannot just open up an After Effects file on any computer and have it run. I'm going to pause this while it renders, but it should take off really quickly, and then we'll be set. Alright, so it went through. Once it's done, this kind of goes away. You can look over here to see the status is done. And then I'll go to my desktop where I saved it, Animatic.
Stop it, you mean old potato? Quiet, Bo Peep, or your sheep get run over.
Okay, so that's what I'm looking for this week. Please don't hesitate if you have any questions. I'd be happy to go over anything again or look at anything. I want to make sure you understand this so that we can have successful animatics moving forward. All right, you guys have a wonderful week.